I moved into the neighborhood at the start of fall, the time of year when everything looks calm on the surface. The trees were neat, the sidewalks were clean, and every house looked like it had been copied and pasted from the same design. White fences lined the streets. Lawns were trimmed short, no weeds, no clutter. It felt safe in the way places feel safe when nothing seems out of place. People waved when I drove by or walked to get the mail, but they never stopped. No one lingered. No one asked questions. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone minded their own business a little too well. At first, I liked that. I had moved there to be alone and reset my life, not to make friends. Across the street from my house was another one, just like mine. Same shape, same fence, same small porch. The only difference was the porch light. It was always on, morning, afternoon, middle of the night. It never changed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people like keeping a light on. Maybe someone worked nights. Maybe they were paranoid. I barely noticed it during the day, but at night it stood out. A soft yellow glow that never moved, never dimmed, never flickered. The first few weeks passed quietly. I settled into a routine. I left for work early, came home around sunset, cooked simple meals, watched TV, and went to bed. Every night, when I turned off my living room lights, I could still see that porch light across the street through my window. It felt like a marker, something constant. That feeling didn't last. After about 3 weeks, I started noticing small things that didn't make sense. I realized I had never seen anyone go in or out of that house. No car ever parked in the driveway. No delivery trucks stopped there. No trash cans were rolled to the curb on pickup days. The lawn never changed. No footprints in the snow when the first cold night hit. No signs of life at all, except that light. I try not to think about it, but once something sticks in your head, it's hard to ignore. Every night, that light was there, aimed straight at my house. Not bright enough to be obvious, but always present. Storms came through one weekend. Heavy rain, strong wind, the kind that knocks out power in parts of town. My lights flickered once, then steadied. When I looked outside, the porch light across the street was still on. It didn't flicker. It didn't dim. It didn't change. That was the first time I felt uneasy. I started paying more attention. I noticed the windows of that house were always dark. Curtains never moved. Blinds never shifted. No reflections from a TV or a lamp. Just darkness behind glass and that steady porch light. One night, while taking out my trash, I stood at the end of my driveway longer than usual. I stared at that house, trying to see something, anything. The air felt cold, quiet in a way that made every small sound stand out. The light buzzed softly, barely audible, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop hearing it. I went back inside and locked my door. After that, I started checking my locks more often. Not because anything had happened, but because my body felt tense for no clear reason. I would wake up at night and glance out the window. That light was always there. Then small things inside my house started to feel off. One morning, I found my kitchen chair slightly pulled out like someone had stood up and left it there. I told myself I probably forgot. Another day, my bathroom light was off when I was sure I left it on. I blamed routine, fatigue, stress. Still, I began locking the back door during the day, not just at night. The night everything changed, I got home late. Work ran long, and by the time I turned onto my street, it was fully dark. The neighborhood looked the same as always, quiet and clean. I parked, stepped out of my car, and started walking up the sidewalk. That's when I noticed my shadow move before I did. It stretched forward on the concrete, shifting slightly like something had changed behind me. For a split second, my brain tried to ignore it. Then I looked up. The porch light across the street turned off. It didn't fade. It didn't flicker. It just went dark. At that exact moment, a light inside my house turned on. The living room light. I stood frozen at the edge of my driveway, keys still in my hand, heart pounding hard enough to feel in my throat. I hadn't left any lights on. I was sure of it. I always turned everything off before leaving. I didn't run at first. I walked quickly, trying to keep control, trying not to panic. When I reached the front door, I unlocked it and stepped inside. The house smelled the same. Nothing looked disturbed at a glance. The living room light was on, casting shadows across furniture that hadn't moved. I checked the front door lock. It was locked. I went room by room, slowly, holding my breath without realizing it. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Everything looked normal. No broken windows. No open drawers. No missing items. Then I reached the back door. The lock was turned. Unlocked. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I knew I had locked it that morning. I always did. There was no sign of forced entry. No damage. Just an unlocked door. I locked it, checked it twice, then went back through the house again. Nothing else was wrong. Still, I barely slept that night. Every small sound made me tense. Every shadow felt heavy. The next morning, I looked across the street. The porch light was gone. Not off. Gone. The fixture itself was missing. The porch looked bare, like it had never been there at all. The windows were dusty. The yard looked untouched, more overgrown than before, like no one had been maintaining it. A real estate sign stood in the front yard. I walked closer than I ever had before. The sign said the house had been vacant for over a year. I stood there, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of it. Vacant. No tenant. No owner living there. I looked at the porch where the light had been. There were no marks, no wires, nothing to suggest it had ever existed. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked my house constantly. Nothing else happened, but the feeling didn't go away. It sat in my chest, heavy and quiet. Eventually, I moved out. Before I left, I spoke to the real estate office listed on the sign. They confirmed it. The house had been empty. No power, no activity, no record of anyone entering it recently. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Now, when I think back on it, I don't believe the house across the street was watching me. Someone was. They used that house as cover, a place no one paid attention to. A light meant to make me feel watched without knowing why. And the moment I noticed, the moment I became aware, they stopped. They unlocked my door to let me know how close they had been. Once I understood, they left. And that's what scares me the most. The house I rented sat on a quiet street where nothing ever really happened. Small yards, old trees, neighbors who waved from a distance and kept moving. It wasn't a bad place. It wasn't great either. It was affordable, clean enough, and close to work. That was all I cared about at the time. The basement was mentioned in the listing, but barely. Just a short line that said unfinished basement for storage. When I moved in, the landlord showed it to me quickly. Narrow wooden stairs, low ceiling, concrete floor, a single bulb hanging from a wire. It smelled damp and old like cardboard and dust. I didn't have much to store, so after the first week, I stopped going down there entirely. Months passed without anything strange. I worked, came home, ate dinner, slept. The house had its normal noises. Pipes knocking, wind in the walls, floorboards creaking when the temperature changed. Nothing that stood out. The first thing I noticed wasn't sound. It was light. One night, I pulled into the driveway later than usual. As I walked toward the front door, I saw a faint glow coming from the small basement window near the ground. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked. The basement light was on. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, staring at the window. I was sure I hadn't been down there in weeks. I told myself I probably went down for something and forgot. It didn't feel convincing, but it was easier than thinking too much about it. Inside, everything was normal. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and went straight to the basement stairs. When I flipped the switch at the top, the light stayed on. I frowned, annoyed at myself, and walked down. That's when I felt it. The air was warm. Basements are always cold, especially unfinished ones. This one had always been chilly. But that night, the air felt stale and warm, like it had been trapped. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was noticeable enough that I stopped halfway down the stairs. The light was on, just like I'd seen from outside. Nothing looked moved at first glance. Boxes stacked against the wall. Old paint cans. A broken chair I meant to throw away. Then I looked at the floor. There were footprints in the dust. Bare footprints. They were fresh enough that the edges were clear. They didn't match my feet. Too narrow. Too long. They crossed the floor and disappeared behind a shelving unit near the far wall. I stood there, staring at them, my heart beating faster with each second. My brain tried to catch up, to explain it. Maybe the landlord came in for an inspection. Maybe someone tracked dirt in while fixing something. Maybe they were old, but I knew they weren't. The dust on that floor had been untouched for months. I hadn't been down there. Those prints were new. I turned the light off and went back upstairs without checking behind the shelves. I didn't want to see anything else. I locked the basement door and told myself I was tired, stressed, imagining things. That explanation carried me through the night, but it didn't last. A few days later, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It was late, well past midnight. The house was quiet except for a slow, dry coughing sound coming from beneath me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded like someone trying to cough without being heard. Short bursts, spaced apart. Then silence. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. After a minute, it happened again. Same sound, same rhythm. The basement was directly under my bedroom. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. The sound felt closer that way, like it was trapped under the boards. I stood there for a long time, barely breathing. Eventually, the coughing stopped. The next morning, I checked the house from top to bottom. Nothing was out of place. No open doors. No signs of entry. I unlocked the basement door and looked down the stairs. The light was off. The air felt cold again. I didn't go down. The coughing returned the next night. And the next. Always late. Always quiet. Never more than a few minutes. It never sounded sick enough to be dangerous. Just persistent, like someone trying to clear their throat. By the end of the week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the landlord. He didn't sound surprised. He told me the basement had been sealed years ago because someone had been living down there without permission. He said they walled off part of it to prevent access. He assured me it was empty now. That should have reassured me. It didn't. If it had been sealed, why were there fresh footprints? I didn't argue with him. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I just thanked him and hung up. That weekend, I packed everything I owned. I didn't sleep in the house again. I stayed with a friend and returned during the day to get my things. The basement stayed quiet while I was there, but I never went near it. I moved out before the week was over. For a while, I tried to forget about it. Life went on. I found another place. I slept better. The memory faded into something uncomfortable but distant. Then a few months later, I heard about the house again. The new tenants had complained about noises. Same thing. Coughing. Movement at night. Warm air coming through the floor. They didn't stay long either. This time, the landlord finally opened the sealed wall. Behind it, they found a small sleeping space. It wasn't elaborate, just enough to survive. A thin mattress on the floor, a pile of old blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers stuffed into bags and hidden in corners, a small battery-powered lamp. The food wasn't old. Some of it was still fresh. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken walls, no damaged locks. Whoever had been living there had access the entire time. They had never left. I think about that house more than I want to. About how close someone was living under my feet, breathing my air, listening to my routines. About how they turned the light on and walked barefoot across the floor while I slept upstairs. I don't think they were trying to scare me. I think they were just surviving. And that's what makes it worse. Because it means they were always there and I was never alone. I moved into the neighborhood because it looked boring and boring felt safe. Rows of houses built in the same decade, faded paint, uneven sidewalks, mailboxes leaning slightly to one side. Nothing about it stood out. No abandoned homes. No bars on windows. No signs warning about crime. People waved just enough to be polite and then went back inside. The house I rented sat between two others. On my left was a family I barely saw. On my right was a single-story house with drawn curtains and a driveway that was always empty. That house belonged to my neighbor. I didn't know his name at first. I only knew he lived alone. I noticed him because I never really saw him. His car was always parked, but I never watched him arrive or leave. The curtains stayed closed day and night. His porch light never turned on. At night, his house was a dark block next to mine like a missing tooth. The first few weeks passed quietly. I settled into a routine. Work during the day, dinner at home, sleep early. I didn't think much about my neighbors. That changed when I started noticing small things around my house that didn't make sense. My side gate would be open in the mornings. Not wide open, just unlatched. I blamed the wind. Then I found my trash bin turned around, facing the fence instead of the street. I told myself I probably moved it without thinking. One evening, I came home and found my porch light on. I never used it. I preferred the dark. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have, trying to remember turning it on. I couldn't. I turned it off and went inside. That night, I heard movement outside my bedroom window. Slow footsteps on gravel. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I told myself it was an animal. There were plenty of stray cats in the area, but animals don't walk with that rhythm. Over the next few nights, the sounds continued. Always late, always brief, always gone by the time I worked up the nerve to look. I started checking my doors more often. Then I started locking them during the day too. One afternoon, I came home early and saw my neighbor standing near the fence between our houses. He wasn't facing me. He was facing my house, standing still, hands at his sides. He didn't jump when he heard my car. He didn't rush away. He slowly turned his head, acknowledged me with a nod, and walked back toward his house. That was the closest I had ever seen him. He looked older than I expected. Thin, pale, clean but worn, like someone who spent too much time indoors. That night, I checked my windows and noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The screen on my bathroom window had been lifted slightly. Not torn, not broken, just pushed out of place. I pushed it back in and locked the window. The next morning, I found dirt on my kitchen floor, not tracked in from the front door. It was near the counter, close to the wall shared with my neighbor's house. I cleaned it up and tried not to think about it. That was when I bought cameras. I installed one facing the front yard and one covering the side of the house. They weren't expensive, but they worked well enough. I told myself they were just for peace of mind. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, the side camera caught movement at 1:18 a.m. I watched the footage the next morning with my coffee shaking slightly in my hand. My neighbor stepped in a frame from behind the fence. He didn't approach the door. He walked slowly along the side of my house, stopping near the bathroom window. He leaned in close, head tilted like he was listening. He stayed there for almost 3 minutes. Then he stepped back and returned the way he came. I watched the clip over and over again. He didn't touch anything. He didn't try the window. He just listened. That bothered me more than if he had tried to break in. I didn't confront him. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what to say. He hadn't done anything illegal. He had just stood there. The following night, the camera didn't record anything. The night after that, it went offline for 2 hours. When it came back on, there was no error message, no alert, just a gap in the footage. The next morning, my back door was unlocked. I stood there staring at it, my mind racing. I knew I locked it. I always locked it. I checked it before bed. I even remembered the sound it made when it clicked into place. Nothing inside was missing. No drawers opened. No items disturbed. But someone had been inside my house. I felt it in the air. The house felt wrong, like a room someone had stood in for too long. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. The sounds outside stopped for a while after that. Days passed, then weeks. I started to relax, telling myself maybe I had scared him off with the cameras. Then one night, I woke up because my bed vibrated slightly. It was subtle, like someone had brushed against the wall. I lay still, heart pounding, listening. I heard breathing, not loud, not heavy, just a slow inhale and exhale coming from somewhere close. The sound came from the wall between my house and his. I pressed my ear against it. The breathing stopped. The next morning, I inspected the shared wall more closely. I noticed something I hadn't before. A small vent near the floor, partly hidden behind a piece of furniture. I pulled it aside and saw that the vent cover had scratch marks around the edges. I removed it. Behind it was darkness and the smell of damp earth. I didn't explore it. I put the cover back and pushed the furniture against it harder than before. That night, I didn't sleep at all. 2 days later, I noticed fresh dirt near the foundation of my house. Right below the vent, the soil looked disturbed, like someone had been digging and then tried to smooth it over. I checked my camera footage. The side camera caught him at 3:04 a.m., kneeling near the foundation, hands moving fast. He looked practiced, efficient. He glanced at my windows repeatedly while he worked. Then he crawled into the darkness under my house. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I sat on my bed watching the footage, my body frozen. The crawl space under my house connected to his. He had been using it the entire time. I stayed awake until morning. When the sun came up, I packed a bag and left. I didn't go back until the police were there. They searched his house first. Inside, they found tools, flashlights, maps of the neighborhood, notes about schedules. My schedule, times I left, times I returned, which lights I used, which rooms I slept in. Then they opened the crawl space. They found bedding, food wrappers, water bottles, a small battery-powered radio, a clear path dug from his house to mine. He had been under my floor for weeks, watching, listening, learning. They arrested him that afternoon. The officer told me he had been doing this for years, moving from house to house, never breaking in the same way twice. He waited. He learned. He made himself invisible. I moved out within days. I don't live in a quiet neighborhood anymore. I don't trust silence the way I used to, because now I know that sometimes the scariest neighbor isn't the loud one. It's the one who never makes a sound. The couple next door moved in 2 weeks after I did. I remember noticing them because of how quiet everything became once they arrived. Before that, the apartment beside mine had been empty, and the building had its usual mix of noise. TVs through walls, someone always cooking late at night, a baby crying somewhere down the hall. When they moved in, that noise faded. They were perfect in a way that didn't feel real. No shouting, no music, no guests, no footsteps pacing late at night. Nothing ever dropped, nothing ever slammed, just silence. I lived alone, so I paid attention to sounds more than most people. Walls talk when you live by yourself. You learn what normal sounds feel like. Pipes, elevators, someone closing a door too hard 3 floors down. With them, there was nothing. Every weekday morning, their door opened at exactly the same time as mine. We didn't coordinate it. It just happened. I'd step into the hallway and see them locking up. The man always wore the same dark jacket. The woman always wore light colors. They never spoke to each other in the hallway. Never argued about forgetting keys. Never rushed. They walked side by side, close but not touching. Every evening, they came back at the same time. Same routine, same pace, same silence. I nodded to them once. They nodded back. No smiles, no frowns, just acknowledgement. Weeks passed and nothing changed. I never saw visitors go into their apartment. No friends, no family, no delivery people, no late night knocks. The building had security cameras, but even those felt pointless where they were concerned. They blended into routine so well that nothing stood out. That was the first thing that bothered me. People don't live like that. Everyone slips eventually. Everyone breaks routine at some point. Everyone gets tired or annoyed or distracted. They didn't. Then one night, something finally happened. It was just after midnight when I heard it. A dull thud through the shared wall. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like something hitting drywall with force. Then another. Then another. There was no yelling, no crying, no raised voices, just the sound of impact spaced evenly apart. I sat up in bed and listened. The thuds continued. Slow, repeated, controlled, not frantic, not angry, just steady. I waited for something else to follow. A shout, a plea, something human. Nothing came. I told myself maybe they were moving furniture. Maybe something fell, but the sound didn't match that. Furniture scrapes. It doesn't hit the same spot over and over. After a few minutes, I got out of bed. I stood by the wall, my ear pressed against it. The sound was closer there, deeper. It vibrated faintly through the plaster. It felt wrong. I pulled on a jacket and stepped into the hallway. The building was quiet, lights dimmed to their usual night setting. I stood outside their door for a moment, listening. The sound was clearer here. Thud, thud, thud. I knocked. The moment my knuckles touched the door, the sound stopped. Not faded, not slowed. It stopped completely. I stood there, hands still raised, heart pounding. I waited for footsteps, for a voice, for the door to open. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. I stood there longer than I should have. Eventually, I went back to my apartment. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small noise made me tense, waiting for the thuds to start again. They didn't. The next morning, I saw them leave like nothing had happened. Same time, same clothes, same quiet. No signs of exhaustion, no bruises, no tension. They walked side by side down the hall, calm as ever. That should have reassured me. It didn't. That evening, When I came home, their apartment door was open. Inside, it was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, no trash. The walls were freshly painted, the smell of new paint strong enough to reach the hallway. The carpet looked newer too, like it had been cleaned or replaced. It was like no one had ever lived there. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to, trying to understand how an apartment could be cleared out that fast. There was no notice posted, no moving truck, no sound of work being done. The building manager came by later that night to lock the door. A week passed, and the apartment stayed empty. Then someone new moved in. A single person. Quiet. Normal. I tried to let it go. I told myself I had misread everything. People move suddenly. Landlords renovate quickly. Noise carries strangely through walls. Then I ran into the building manager in the parking garage. I asked him where the couple next door had gone. He looked confused. He told me there was never a couple there. Only one tenant. A man who moved out suddenly. I laughed at first, thinking he misunderstood. But his expression didn't change. He checked his tablet. Same answer. One tenant. Always one. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I went back upstairs, feeling hollow. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the banging. About the silence. About how they never spoke to each other. About how controlled everything had been. I started looking into the building's history. It didn't take long to find it. Years ago, one of the apartments had been used for illegal detainment. People held without paperwork, without records. They weren't supposed to make noise. They weren't allowed to speak. Any sound brought punishment. The reports mentioned repeated impact noises. People hitting walls. Not screaming, not yelling, just hitting, trying to be heard without breaking rules. The apartment number matched. The walls had been repainted multiple times since then. New management, new security. The past buried under layers of paint and silence. I realized then why they were so perfect, why they left together, why they returned together, why they never argued. Because one of them wasn't free to. The banging wasn't a fight. It was someone testing how much sound they could make without consequences. When I knocked, it stopped because someone noticed. The next day, the apartment was erased. I moved out a month later. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how close that wall was to my bed. About how many nights I slept while someone else was trapped a few feet away, measuring sound, counting time, waiting for someone to notice. I noticed, but not soon enough. I moved into the house because it was cheap and quiet, and at that point in my life, quiet felt like safety. The neighborhood looked normal enough. Small houses, narrow driveways, chain-link fences, and yards that were just big enough to pretend you cared about them. People kept to themselves. Cars left in the morning and came back at night. Nothing stood out. The house next to mine belonged to a man who lived alone. I didn't know his name at first. I only knew his routines. Every morning, his porch light turned off at 6:12. His front door opened at 6:15. His car started at 6:17. He drove away slowly, never speeding, never backing out too fast. Every evening, he returned at 7:48. Same order, same timing. At first, I didn't even realize I was noticing these things. They just sank into my head over time. When you live alone, patterns become comforting. Predictable neighbors feel safe. He never waved, never acknowledged me, but I saw him watching, not staring exactly, just aware. If I was outside, he stayed on his porch a little longer. If I took my trash out late, his kitchen light would turn on. If I came home late, his car would already be parked, but the engine would still be warm when I walked past. I told myself that was coincidence. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Then small things started feeling wrong. My trash cans were moved. Not knocked over. Not rummaged through. Just shifted slightly. Inches, sometimes a foot. I thought it was the wind at first, but the lids were always closed. Perfectly placed. One morning, my recycling bin was back by the fence instead of the curb. I was sure I had put it out the night before. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember. Memory is fragile. It bends when you want it to. I started locking my doors during the day. One afternoon, I came home early from work. As I turned onto my street, I saw him standing in my yard. Not near the sidewalk, not by the fence. He was standing close to my house, facing one of my windows. He didn't react when my car pulled in. He didn't jump, or turn quickly. He just stepped back slowly, walked to his yard, and went inside. I didn't confront him. I didn't wave. I sat in my car longer than I should have, watching his house. The blinds didn't move. The lights stayed off. That night, I checked every window and door before going to bed. Everything was locked. Everything was normal. I started noticing marks near my back gate. Scuffed dirt, bent grass, a latch that didn't sit quite right anymore. Nothing obvious enough to prove anything, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I installed a cheap camera facing my backyard. It wasn't great quality, but it was something. The first few nights, nothing showed up. Then one night, at 2:13 a.m., the motion alert went off. I watched the footage with the lights off, volume low. The camera caught him standing at the edge of the frame, not entering the yard, just standing there, facing my house. He stayed there for 6 minutes. He didn't move closer. He didn't leave. He just stood, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening. Then he stepped back and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I stayed home. I watched his house. His routine didn't change. Porch light off, door open, car gone, like nothing had happened. That's when I started noticing how little he owned. No decorations, no yard tools, no packages, no visitors, no trash bags left out overnight. His bins were always empty. One evening, I saw him carrying a black bag to his car. Not a trash bag, thicker. He placed it carefully in the trunk and drove away. He came back an hour later with the trunk empty. I checked my camera footage more often after that. Most nights, he didn't appear at all. Other nights, he walked the perimeter of my fence. Slow, careful, never stepping fully into view. He never touched anything on camera. That came later. I woke up one morning and found my back door unlocked. I stood there staring at it, my hand on the handle, my chest tight. I knew I had locked it. I always did. I tested the lock every night. I had started checking it twice. Nothing inside was missing. Nothing was disturbed. The house smelled the same, felt the same, but something had changed. I felt exposed. That night, I didn't turn any lights on. I sat in the dark, watching the camera feed on my phone. Around 1:40 a.m., I saw movement. He was inside my yard. This time, he didn't stop at the edge. He walked slowly toward my back door. He stopped inches from it. He leaned forward slightly, like he was listening. He reached out and touched the door handle. He didn't try to open it. He stood there for a long time, then stepped back and left. The next morning, I found mud on my kitchen floor. A single footprint. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what to say. There was no damage, no theft, just a footprint and a feeling I couldn't shake. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my bedroom door. Days went by without incident, then weeks. I thought maybe he had lost interest. Maybe he realized I was watching. Then my camera stopped working. Not broken, not unplugged. The footage just cut out for 3 hours one night. When it came back, the timestamp jumped forward. No error message, no alert. That same morning, I found a note taped to my back fence. No words, just a hand-drawn outline of my house. Every door marked, every window, including the ones not visible from the street. I packed a bag that day. I stayed with a friend for 2 nights. When I came back to get more clothes, his car was gone. His house was dark. No porch light. No sound. I checked online listings later. His house wasn't for sale. It wasn't for rent. No record of a move. 3 days later, the police were on my street. They went into his house. I watched from my window as they carried things out in evidence bags. Tools, black plastic, cameras, printed photos. I learned later that he had been arrested miles away, breaking into a different home. The officer who spoke to me told me my house was listed in a notebook they found in his car. Pages of notes, my routines, my work schedule, the times my lights turned off, the nights I slept late. The reason he hadn't broken in yet was simple. He was waiting for the right night. I moved out within a week. I don't live alone anymore. Sometimes when I take the trash out at night, I still feel that same tightness in my chest. That feeling of being observed without seeing who's watching. Because what scares me the most isn't that he was my neighbor. It's how long he lived next to me without ever doing anything wrong. The couple next door moved in 2 weeks after I did. I remember noticing them because of how quiet everything became once they arrived. Before that, the apartment beside mine had been empty, and the building had its usual mix of noise. TVs through walls, someone always cooking late at night, a baby crying somewhere down the hall. When they moved in, that noise faded. They were perfect in a way that didn't feel real. No shouting, no music, no guests, no footsteps pacing late at night. Nothing ever dropped, nothing ever slammed, just silence. I live alone, so I paid attention to sounds more than most people. Walls talk when you live by yourself. You learn what normal sounds feel like. Pipes, elevators, someone closing a door too hard 3 floors down. With them, there was nothing. Every weekday morning, their door opened at exactly the same time as mine. We didn't coordinate it. It just happened. I'd step into the hallway and see them locking up. The man always wore the same dark jacket. The woman always wore light colors. They never spoke to each other in the hallway. Never argued about forgetting keys. Never rushed. They walked side by side, close but not touching. Every evening, they came back at the same time. Same routine, same pace, same silence. I nodded to them once. They nodded back. No smiles, no frowns, just acknowledgement. Weeks passed and nothing changed. I never saw visitors go into their apartment. No friends, no family, no delivery people, no late night knocks. The building had security cameras, but even those felt pointless where they were concerned. They blended into routine so well that nothing stood out. That was the first thing that bothered me. People don't live like that. Everyone slips eventually. Everyone breaks routine at some point. Everyone gets tired or annoyed or distracted. They didn't. Then one night, something finally happened. It was just after midnight when I heard it. A dull thud through the shared wall. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like something hitting drywall with force. Then another. Then another. There was no yelling, no crying, no raised voices, just the sound of impact spaced evenly apart. I sat up in bed and listened. The thuds continued. Slow, repeated, controlled, not frantic, not angry, just steady. I waited for something else to follow. A shout, a plea, something human. Nothing came. I told myself maybe they were moving furniture. Maybe something fell, but the sound didn't match that. Furniture scrapes. It doesn't hit the same spot over and over. After a few minutes, I got out of bed. I stood by the wall, my ear pressed against it. The sound was closer there, deeper. It vibrated faintly through the plaster. It felt wrong. I pulled on a jacket and stepped into the hallway. The building was quiet, lights dimmed to their usual night setting. I stood outside their door for a moment, listening. The sound was clearer here. Thud, thud, thud. I knocked. The moment my knuckles touched the door, the sound stopped. Not faded, not slowed. It stopped completely. I stood there, hand still raised, heart pounding. I waited for footsteps, for a voice, for the door to open. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. I stood there longer than I should have. Eventually, I went back to my apartment. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small noise made me tense, waiting for the thuds to start again. They didn't. The next morning, I saw them leave like nothing had happened. Same time, same clothes, same quiet. No signs of exhaustion, no bruises, no tension. They walked side by side down the hall, calm as ever. That should have reassured me. It didn't. That evening, when I came home, their apartment door was open. Inside, it was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, no trash. The walls were freshly painted, the smell of new paint strong enough to reach the hallway. The carpet looked newer too, like it had been cleaned or replaced. It was like no one had ever lived there. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to, trying to understand how an apartment could be cleared out that fast. There was no notice posted, no moving truck, no sound of work being done. The building manager came by later that night to lock the door. A week passed and the apartment stayed empty. Then someone new moved in. A single person. Quiet. Normal. I tried to let it go. I told myself I had misread everything. People move suddenly. Landlords renovate quickly. Noise carries strangely through walls. Then I ran into the building manager in the parking garage. I asked him where the couple next door had gone. He looked confused. He told me there was never a couple there. Only one tenant. A man who moved out suddenly. I laughed at first, thinking he misunderstood. But his expression didn't change. He checked his tablet. Same answer. One tenant. Always one. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I went back upstairs feeling hollow. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the banging. About the silence. About how they never spoke to each other. About how controlled everything had been. I started looking into the building's history. It didn't take long to find it. Years ago, one of the apartments had been used for illegal detainment. People held without paperwork, without records. They weren't supposed to make noise. They weren't allowed to speak. Any sound brought punishment. The reports mentioned repeated impact noises. People hitting walls. Not screaming, not yelling, just hitting, trying to be heard without breaking rules. The apartment number matched. The walls had been repainted multiple times since then. New management, new security. The past buried under layers of paint and silence. I realized then why they were so perfect, why they left together, why they returned together, why they never argued. Because one of them wasn't free to. The banging wasn't a fight. It was someone testing how much sound they could make without consequences. When I knocked, it stopped because someone noticed. The next day, the apartment was erased. I moved out a month later. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how close that wall was to my bed. About how many nights I slept while someone else was trapped a few feet away, measuring sound, counting time, waiting for someone to notice. I noticed, but not soon enough. My house sits on a quiet street where nothing really happens. Most people here stick to routines. Same cars, same times, same porch lights. I work late, so most nights I'm home by 9:30, eating something quick and sitting in my living room with the lights low. That's how I first saw him, through the front window, moving past my house like part of the background. Every night at exactly 9:40, a man walked past. At first, it didn't mean anything. People walk for exercise. People walk dogs. People clear their heads after work. I didn't think twice about it. He wore the same dark jacket and jeans every time, but that alone didn't seem strange. Some people don't care about clothes. After a few nights, I realized the timing was exact. I would glance at the clock, and within seconds, he would pass my window. Same slow pace, same posture, arms hanging loose, head straight ahead. He never looked down at a phone, never wore headphones, never adjusted his clothes. He didn't glance at houses or cars. He just walked. The thing that started bothering me was that I never saw him walk back. My street isn't a loop. It's a straight stretch with houses on both sides. If someone walks past one way, they eventually come back the other way or get picked up. But he never returned. Not later that night. Not earlier. Not ever. I started checking more carefully. If I missed him at the window, I'd look at my security camera footage. Every single night, there he was, moving from left to right across the frame at 9:40. Always the same direction. Always the same pace. Never once did the camera catch him coming back. That's when it stopped feeling normal. I told myself he might turn down a side street. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe his ride picked him up out of view. I tried to explain it away, but my attention stayed locked on him. Once you notice a pattern like that, it's hard to ignore. I started waiting for him. At 9:35, I'd sit still. At 9:38, I'd turn the TV volume down. At 9:40, I'd watch him pass. My chest would tighten every time, even though nothing happened. He never slowed down, never stopped, never looked at my house. Until the night, I didn't see him. At 9:40, the sidewalk stayed empty. I checked the window again. Nothing. I pulled up the camera feed, thinking maybe I had missed him. The timestamp showed 9:40. No movement, no figure crossing the frame. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made my stomach drop. I waited another minute. Still nothing. I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain, like the silence after a noise that's been there too long. I grabbed a jacket and stepped outside, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The street looked the same as always. Quiet, clean, street lights humming softly. I stood near my driveway, watching both directions. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. At 9:52, I heard footsteps behind me. They were close. Too close. I turned and saw him standing at the edge of my driveway. He hadn't walked up from the sidewalk. I didn't hear him approach. One moment, I was alone. The next, he was there just standing still, staring at my front door. Up close, he looked older than I expected. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. His face was tired, blank in a way that felt practiced. His clothes were clean, but worn, like he wore them often. His eyes didn't move much. He wanted to know if this was the house with the side entrance. The question hit me harder than it should have. My house does have a side door, but it's not visible from the street. You wouldn't know it was there unless you walked around the house or looked closely. I told him no. He stared at me for a long time after that. Not angry, not confused, just staring like he was memorizing something. I felt exposed standing there, like I had made a mistake by coming outside at all. Then he turned and walked away down the street. I didn't follow him. I didn't call out. I went straight back inside and locked every door. I checked the side entrance twice. The lock was still secure, but that didn't calm me. I pulled up the camera footage immediately. For the first time since I installed it, the footage showed him walking back past my house. This time, he moved from right to left. Same pace, same posture, same clothes, but something felt different. His head was slightly tilted, like he was thinking. He passed my house and kept going until he disappeared out of frame. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, I stayed alert. I checked the locks constantly. I watched the cameras more than I should have. Every night at 9:40, I waited. He never came back. A week passed, then another. The routine was gone, but the fear stayed. I kept thinking about how precise his timing had been, how he knew about the side door, how he stood there like he had already decided something. 2 weeks later, I saw the news. Police had arrested a man who had been breaking into homes in nearby neighborhoods. He targeted houses on quiet streets. He entered through side doors, usually unlocked or hidden from view. The report mentioned he would walk the same routes repeatedly, watching patterns, learning schedules. They showed his photo. It was him. The clothes were different, but the face was the same. The blank expression, the eyes that didn't move much. They said he had a list of houses written down when they caught him. Addresses, notes, times. My address was next. I stood in my living room after reading that, looking at my front door, then at the side wall where the hidden entrance was. I thought about how close he had been, how calmly he stood there, how he walked away only after I said no. He never came back because he didn't need to. He already knew which houses were empty at night, which ones had side entrances, which ones had people who stayed inside and followed routines. Mine was almost one of them. Now, every night at 9:40, I still look at the window. The sidewalk stays empty, but I don't feel safe anymore. The package showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting neatly in the center of my welcome mat like it had been placed there on purpose. I noticed at the moment I pulled into the driveway because I wasn't expecting anything. I hadn't ordered anything online in weeks. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, staring at the box. The label was wrong. The name wasn't mine. I didn't recognize it at all. The house number was wrong too, off by 1 digit. But the street name was correct. My street, my porch, my door. I picked it up and turned it over a few times. No return address, just printed shipping information and tape that looked professionally done. It didn't feel light, but it wasn't heavy either. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, planning to deal with it later. After changing clothes and making dinner, I thought about taking it to the neighbor whose house number was closest to the one on the label. But something about it bothered me. I couldn't explain why. It just felt wrong to walk it over. Instead, I put it back outside by the door. The next morning, it was gone. At first, I assumed someone realized their mistake and came back for it. Maybe the delivery driver noticed. Maybe the person who ordered it tracked it and picked it up. I didn't think much about it until that night, when I came home from work and saw another box sitting on my porch. Same size, same tape, same wrong name. This time, the house number was different again. Still wrong. Still not mine. Still my street. I left it outside. The next morning, it was gone again. That's when the pattern started. Packages appeared every few days. Sometimes 2 days in a row. Sometimes after a week. Always the same type of box. Always addressed to the same wrong name. Always a different house number that wasn't mine, but close enough to look like a mistake. I never saw anyone drop them off. I never saw anyone pick them up. They just appeared and disappeared. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I didn't open them. I didn't move them. I didn't contact the delivery company. I treated them like they didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from thinking about them. I started coming home earlier just to see if I could catch the delivery. I never did. I checked my porch camera footage, scrolling back through the timestamps. The boxes didn't show up on camera. One moment the porch was empty, the next moment the package was there. No motion alert, no recorded movement. That made my stomach tighten. I checked the camera settings. Everything was working. It picked up cars passing by. It picked up stray cats. It picked up the mail carrier, but not the packages. After about 3 weeks, something changed. I came home one evening and noticed the package was closer to my door than usual. Not centered on the mat, right up against the door frame. Close enough that I would have hit it if I opened the door without looking. That night, I dreamed someone was standing outside my house, breathing softly, waiting for me to notice. I woke up with my heart racing. The next package arrived 2 days later. I stood over it for a long time. I told myself I wouldn't open it. I told myself it wasn't mine. I told myself it was safer not to know. Then I picked it up and carried it inside. I didn't open it right away. I sat on the table and paced the room. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. I closed the curtains. I turned off the porch light. When I finally cut the tape, my hands were shaking. Inside were photos, printed photographs, glossy paper, high quality. The first one was my house, taken from across the street. Daytime, clear angle. I recognized the way the light hit the front window. The next photo was my backyard, the fence, the tree near the corner, taken from a position I knew couldn't be from the street. I flipped through them slowly. There was one of me unlocking my front door, one of me taking out the trash, one of me sitting on my couch at night, the glow of the TV lighting up the room. I didn't remember seeing anyone when those photos could have been taken. I didn't remember any movement, any shadows. The last photo was different. It was taken from inside my living room. The angle was low, near the corner, just enough to see me standing near the kitchen doorway. I recognized the perspective instantly. It was from behind the armchair I usually sat in. Someone had been inside my house. I dropped the photos onto the table and stepped back like they were dangerous. My skin felt tight, like my body was trying to pull away from itself. I checked every room again. Closets, bathroom, under the bed. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. But that didn't matter anymore. That night, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. Just a firm control knock. I froze in place. I didn't answer. The knock came again, slower this time, more deliberate. I stood in the dark, holding my breath, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. The knocking stopped after a minute. I waited for footsteps, for the sound of someone leaving. I didn't hear anything. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I checked the door through the peephole. No one was there. I didn't sleep that night. The packages stopped after that. Days passed, then weeks. I didn't receive another one. I didn't see any movement on my porch camera. I stayed hyper-aware, constantly checking locks, double-checking windows, scanning the yard before stepping outside. I reported everything to the police. They took the photos. They took the boxes. They asked questions. I answered them. I could tell from their expressions that they didn't have much to go on. Life slowly returned to something that felt almost normal. Almost. Months later, I got a call. Police had arrested a man who had been using random houses as package drop points. He ordered items under fake names and used wrong house numbers but correct streets. He tracked the deliveries, watched who interacted with them, watched who ignored them. He was stalking residents. He had been inside multiple homes, sometimes to take photos, sometimes just to learn layouts. He used unlocked doors, open windows, moments when people were distracted. My house was one of many. The officer explained that the knock on my door likely wasn't meant to scare me. It was meant to confirm I was home. When I didn't answer, he stopped using my address. I wasn't special. I was convenient. After that, I moved. New place, new locks, new routines. I don't leave packages outside anymore. I don't ignore things that don't make sense. Sometimes when a delivery truck slows down on my street, I still feel that same tightness in my chest. That feeling of being selected without knowing why. Because the scariest part wasn't the photos. It was realizing how easy it had been for someone to step into my life without me noticing at all. My street used to be loud in the way normal streets are loud. The kind of noise you stop noticing after a while. Kids riding bikes in circles until dinner. Dogs barking at nothing. Car doors slamming. Someone mowing a lawn too early on Saturday. It wasn't special, but it felt alive. I moved there because of that. I liked hearing people exist around me. It made the nights feel shorter. At first, nothing changed. The same faces, the same routines. Mrs. Carter across the street watering her plants every morning. The Ramirez kids playing basketball in the driveway until the ball bounced into someone else's yard. Mr. Henson taking his trash out late at night like clockwork. Then, slowly, the noise started thinning out. It wasn't sudden. That's what made it easy to ignore. One day, the kids weren't outside. Another day, no one walked their dog. The sound of engines in the morning faded until some days I didn't hear a single car leave. At first, I told myself it was weather, then school schedules, then work from home. There were plenty of reasons that made sense on the surface, but the quiet didn't feel normal. Trash day came and went, and only a few cans were at the curb. The next week, fewer. Some houses stopped putting them out entirely. Mailboxes stayed full. Flyers stuck out and curled in the sun. Porch lights stopped turning on at night. People were still there. I could tell. Cars sat in driveways. Curtains moved sometimes. Lights flickered inside houses and then went dark again. They just weren't going outside. I still did. I told myself someone had to, that it was better not to act scared. I walked to my mailbox every day, even when it was empty. I took my trash out like normal. I stood on my porch longer than necessary, just to remind myself I was still part of the street. No one joined me. When I waved, curtains shifted. Doors stayed closed. The first time I felt real fear was when I realized how quiet night had become. No TVs through windows. No late-night music. No dogs barking at passing cars. The streetlights hummed, and that was it. A long stretch of houses sitting in darkness like they had been abandoned. I started checking the locks more often. I noticed little things then. How quickly lights turned off when I stepped outside at night. How some houses never seemed to change at all. Same cars, same position, day after day. One evening, I walked past the Ramirez house. Their basketball hoop was gone. Not knocked over, not broken, removed completely, like it had never been there. A few days later, Mrs. Carter's plants were dead. That was when I realized people weren't just staying inside. They were leaving, but not all at once. Not with signs or goodbyes. Just quietly disappearing. No moving trucks. No yard sales. No farewell waves. Just absence. I stayed because I didn't want to believe something was wrong. I told myself it was coincidence. People moved. Neighborhoods changed. Then I heard the footsteps. It was late, well past midnight. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. That's when I heard a sound that didn't belong. A soft click, then another. I sat up slowly, holding my breath. The sound came again. Metallic. Controlled. Someone was trying a door. Not my door. At least not yet. I moved carefully to the window and peered through the blinds. The streetlight cast long shadows across the road. I couldn't see anyone at first. Then I saw movement. A figure stepped up to the house, 2 doors down. They reached out, tested the handle, waited, then moved on. No rush. No panic. Just slow, deliberate steps. They tried every door, one by one. No pounding. No kicking. Just quiet testing, listening for resistance. I stayed completely still. The figure moved down the street, stopping at each house. They never looked around, never checked for witnesses. They didn't need to. No one was watching. When they reached my neighbor's house, the door opened. Just a crack. The figure slipped inside and closed it gently behind them. I didn't hear anything after that. No struggle, no alarm, no sound at all. I didn't call the police. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't move until morning. When the sun came up, the street looked the same as it always did. Quiet, empty, still. Then the trucks arrived. 3 moving trucks pulled up the houses on my block before noon. Families packed what they could and left without speaking to anyone. No goodbyes, no explanations. just hurried movements and closed doors. I watched from my window, feeling like I was already living somewhere else. By the end of the week, more houses were empty. Some still had furniture inside. Others were stripped bare. No signs, no listings, just gone. I finally asked someone from a nearby block what was happening. That's when I learned the truth. There had been a break-in crew working the area. They didn't rush. They didn't force their way in. They watched. They waited. They learned which streets stopped looking out for each other. They chose places where people stayed inside, where no one checked on neighbors, where fear spread quietly, house by house. They didn't need violence. They didn't need threats. They let the street collapse on its own. Once people stopped going outside, once the noise died, the street was theirs. I realized then that the quiet hadn't just happened. It had been created. I moved not long after that. The last night I spent there, I stood on my porch and looked down the street. Half the houses were dark. No lights, no movement, no signs of life. It felt like waiting for something to finish dying. I didn't wait. I left before the street went completely dark. Sometimes I think about how easy it was, how slowly it happened, how no one noticed until it was too late, and how silence can be louder than any scream when it spreads far enough. I moved into the neighborhood because it felt ordinary, and ordinary was exactly what I needed at the time. The street curved slightly, lined with aging trees that dropped leaves into clean gutters. Most of the houses were older, but cared for. People waved. Some stopped to talk. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad ever made the news. The house across from mine belonged to an older woman who lived alone. She kept her lawn trimmed and her porch swept. She waved every time I left for work. 2 houses down lived a young couple with a dog that barked at passing cars. On weekends, someone always grilled. At night, porch lights came on one by one like a signal that everyone had made it home. That was how it stayed for the first year. Then small things started changing, and I didn't notice right away. The first thing was the internet. One night, my connection dropped. No warning, no slowdown. Just gone. I reset the router. Nothing. I checked my phone. No service issue reported. I went to bed annoyed and dealt with it the next morning. It worked fine after that. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. I noticed because I had been streaming a show and the screen froze. Again, it came back by morning. I blamed the provider. I blamed old wiring. I didn't think much more about it. Then I noticed my porch light was on when I got home from work. I never used it. I preferred keeping the outside dark. I turned it off and moved on. The next day, it was on again. I started locking my doors out of habit, then checking them twice. That feeling crept in slowly, the sense that something was off but not wrong enough to point to. The first real moment of fear came when I found a footprint inside my house. It was faint, just a dusty outline near the back door. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had stepped there with dirty shoes. The shape didn't match mine. Too narrow, longer toes. I cleaned it up and told myself I was overthinking. After that, I became aware of how much my neighbors could see, the angle of my windows, the way my lights showed through the curtains, how easy it was to know when I was home just by the sound of my car. One evening, I was taking trash out when I noticed the older woman across the street standing on her porch. She wasn't waving this time. She wasn't looking at me either. She was staring past my house, down the street, like she was waiting for something. The next day, her house was empty. Not sold, not for rent, just empty. Her car was gone, her porch clean, her mailbox overflowing. No one mentioned it. A week later, the couple with the dog moved out. The dog didn't bark as they left. It wasn't in the car. By then, the internet outages were happening every night. Always after midnight. Always back by morning. I started leaving my laptop open to see what happened when the connection dropped. That's when I noticed something strange. Even when my internet went out, my router light stayed active. Not normal activity either. Heavy data transfer. Uploads, not downloads. I changed my Wi-Fi password. That night, the porch light came on again. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of my back door handle moving. Slowly, carefully, I lay completely still listening. The handle turned once, then stopped. I heard footsteps on the deck, moving away. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I checked my router logs. There was a device connected to my network that wasn't mine. It had a generic name, something that looked like a printer or smart appliance. The connection history showed it had been active for weeks. I unplugged everything. That afternoon, I saw a man standing in my driveway when I came home. He wasn't touching anything, just standing near my car, looking at my house like he was measuring it. He looked normal, clean clothes, nothing threatening. He walked away before I could react. I installed cameras that night. The footage showed things I wish I hadn't seen. Every night, after my internet dropped, someone moved through my yard. Sometimes they approached the house. Sometimes they stood just outside the camera's edge, close enough that I could hear faint movement, but not see them clearly. They never rushed. They knew when the cameras were active and when they weren't. One night, I watched footage of someone standing directly under my bedroom window for almost an hour, just standing. The next morning, I found my crawl space covers slightly open. I called the police. They came, looked around, took notes. Nothing was stolen. No forced entry. No crime. I felt stupid after they left. Then I found the notebook. It was hidden under my house, wrapped in plastic. Pages filled with handwritten notes. My schedule, my habits, when I showered, when I slept, when I left lights on. Other addresses were listed too. Some crossed out, some marked with dates. The crossed out ones matched the houses where people had moved away. I learned later that a group had been targeting quiet neighborhoods like mine. They didn't break in right away. They monitored. They learned routines. They accessed home networks, cameras, smart devices. They used one house as a hub, the empty one across the street. The woman hadn't moved. She had left after discovering someone had been using her home without her knowledge. I wasn't the first. Once enough houses were compromised, they started entering them one by one. Not to steal at first, just to test boundaries. Fear did the rest. People left on their own. By the time arrests were made, half the street was empty. I moved before they finished. I don't live in a smart home anymore. I don't trust silence. And when my internet drops now, even for a second, I check every log. Because I learned the hard way that some neighbors don't need to knock to know everything about you.